In today's webinar, we're going to be talking about one of our products here at Certara, Synchrogenix Writer, and specifically in the medical writing space. But we wanted to talk, open up with our first slide about our mission and vision, and that's really transforming drug discovery and development, and we're doing so through our end-to-end platform, in which we'll just be talking about one of those pieces of that platform today. So today's session, as Sebastian mentioned, we do have roughly 30 minutes. We do want to allow for time at the end for questions and answers. So we do have quite a bit to get through. In the event that we don't get to all questions, we'd be available afterwards as well. But today we want to give an introduction and a demo to the specific product we're talking about. Address a little bit about best practices for adoptions and scale, and then metrics to consider in your journey. And we've taken these kind of, and we'll talk about them generically because we've gotten a lot of feedback from our customers, and so we've kind of wanted to generalize them so that you all could see, what others are experiencing and thinking about as they try to streamline their medical writing process. So today's, like Sebastian was saying, today's topic is learning how we can streamline the drug development programs for writing, and specifically taking tools like the Synchrogenix Writer product and applying them. So my name is Trevor Standish. I am a director of product management here at Certara, and I've been here a couple years, and I manage both the reg and med writing softwares, and including publishing, and collaborate with our other team members and other product leaders. So what we want to do is just get right into it, since we don't have too much time together, and want to make sure we get to those questions. So introduction. When we were just at our P21 live event in Philly this week with a lot of great customers, and when we, I'm going to mention that for a moment, because when we think about the world of data, and we think about the world of automation and using technologies and software, we always ask a lot of questions. And when you ask in the data world, what are you using today? If the answer is Excel, Microsoft Excel, it's often the beginning of the automation journey for those individuals and those data teams. And so when we talk about medical writing and regulatory writing, we ask similar types of questions. We say, well, what are you using today? What is in your toolkit to help you in this process? And so a lot of the time, we hear teams say we write everything using Microsoft Word. So this is kind of what we call the baseline of automation, in terms of you're just beginning your automation journey, or maybe you haven't even started yet. But this is the tool you have. We say, well, what else do you have? And oftentimes the second response is, well, we have a document management system. And so we're kind of ascending this journey of automation in terms of what you have. Other teams say we're a little more advanced. We have word templates, so meaning they have some built-in styling. They have predetermined text that they can reuse for like a narrative or a clinical study report. And then the last one we kind of get to in general when we have these discussions with our customers and potential customers is, well, sometimes data teams generate documents for us, and specifically initial draft documents, and then send it to us. And then there's a fair amount of either we send it back and we do some rework, or we finish up or clean up the document for some further message refinement, some styling, and so on and so forth. And so if any of these sound familiar, it's probably because you or your team or your organization is kind of somewhere in this journey of discovering automation in the writing process. And we can talk, about what you can do at different phases of this. But more or less, when we see this, we see that there's a lot of opportunity for automation. And so when we, before we get into talk about, a specific product, we say, when we set upon this journey of streamlining the process for writers, we said, well, how can we go from existing data sets or existing text to a fully completed document? And so no versioning, passing back and forth, no exporting and then sending back and then importing. How do we just go from that existing piece of content to a completed document so that you can put it in a repository, but with no need of additional intervention? And that's a big problem in our industry, right? And so there's a lot of hurdles that we said we need to address. So the first one was very clear. There's no seamless handshake between data and writing teams. So how are we getting that data for patient narratives? How are we getting TLFs from the stats team? Written content is highly manual. So we talked about stock text is great, so template text, but it oftentimes is very limited, and you have to reword it or change it for this particular use case. There's no traceability between data and documents, so this is a big one that often causes a lot of rework. And then ultimately, there's a good amount of variability, right, in studies, in the data itself, in presentation, whether you're talking about oncology or vaccine, like there's just a lot of variability that needs to take into account. So these are all elements that we looked at to address with this product. So real quick, I'll give an introduction to Synchrogenix Writer, just a high-level overview for a slide, and then we will get into a quick demo and kind of show, and you can see in real time how people are using it and today to kind of streamline their processes and achieve automation. So this product is really purpose-built for our industry, and so that's one of the unique things that we do at Certara. If you think about the software product, Microsoft Word, that's a general authoring product that spans about every different category out there. And so Synchrogenix Writer is purpose-built for our space to really address the things around organization, collaboration, and ultimately automation to generate our documents. And this product is relatively young. It was launched last year. So if you're not aware of it, that could be why. And when we set out to launch this, there's really three key pillars that we said we wanted to deliver on for our customers and for our users. And that is to empower teams to focus on key decision points. And so focus on things like message development, interpretation. That's where really the expertise and skill of medical writing is most important. We said, okay, we want to ensure consistency and quality and standardization throughout. You'll see that in the demo. We have lots of QC features in there in the software. And that really helps not only within writing for one study, but as study to study, phase 1, 2, 3, etc. You want to have consistency, and so that was another huge pillar. And then the third one is ultimately the goal of not only this product, Synchrogenix Writer, but for most software products is about really saving time, right? In our world, we're talking about writing more efficiently, so increasing output while saving time and costs. And so when we launched the product, we said, okay, here's what the product really focuses on. And we did so starting with our focus being on patient narratives. And so the capabilities today focus around that. We're actually, the team's excited that we're actually adding in other types of automation through things like the reviewer's guide for the SDTM data, and then also clinical study reports, which we can talk about. And so when you look at all these different types of capabilities that you would look for in a software, things like auto content generation and co-authoring, real-time previewing, when we look out in the category, document management systems weren't really checking the boxes. And I think that's pretty apparent to most people. It supports multiple documents, but in terms of automating, document management systems, DMSs, are more or less repositories, and they offer really no automation. And then when we looked at other tools out there, there are some around some content generation. There's some around templates and possibly reusable content. but then they fall short. They didn't have all these other things like built-in styling and using SDTM data or real-time previewing or collaboration. So when we launched Writer, we said, okay, these are all the types of things that teams, both data and writing teams who collaborate in the software need in order to be effective at this automation journey. So without further ado, let's get over and jump in and look at Synchrogenix Writer right now. All right, so Synchrogenix Writer is a web-based product. So you can see here I'm logging in. And the first thing you do when you log in as a new user is this would be blank, but more or less these are all the various studies that I would be working on with my colleagues. So in this case, because we're in a demo environment, these are obviously a lot of demo and demo data. But I can pull one up right now, go and grab this one at the bottom. So in Synchrogenix Writer, we want to make it so that for you as a writer or a team, that everything is self-contained within the application for you to need. And so as you look across the left-hand side, you have all these various icons and various sections you can work in, and we'll go through those. But the first one is essentially default settings. And so when you set up a new study, we want you to go ahead and set up some standard settings right away, because that actually has a cascading effect. And so when you set them here, it translates down throughout the rest of the work you do. And I will call out maybe this data fields in green here as a great example for the QC aspect of it. So you come in here and set these, and these should all look pretty familiar. It should look generally pretty easy to use and familiar, and we find our customers and our users say that for the most part. Here you can add team members, so myself, a few other colleagues of mine, and we have different rights that we can work on and do different things in this particular study. So you can add team members for collaboration. The next area is really, and I'm just giving you a quick intro, but we're going to really spend, I would say, 70–80% of our time looking at how you would actually write in the software. So in this case, here's where we would load our data. So you can load SDTM and Adams data sets directly to the software. We support a number of versions, CSV and SAS, as you can see here. But you just load them up, and then you can make them active for you to utilize. And that is a key point of automation. So you do want to use that data. It not only really amplifies the amount of automation you can achieve when you're using the software, but it also adds in a couple other elements. It makes it so that you have traceability back to the documents about where those particular values came from. And so it's a huge benefit we see our customer tell us about. And then the other one is the QC process. And so having the system will read in the data directly, and that really cuts down on errors of like maybe a copy and paste from a profile or something like that. And so the next area we want to talk about really quick is our subject list, so our patients. So this is really about, and we created this before the call, but this is really about who we want to write about. And so you can add a lot of different filters. In this case, I pulled in some, I'm looking at the adverse event data, and I said, here are some filters that I want to apply. And in this case, it's showing I have 233 subjects I would be writing about. You can make other subject lists, so you're not restricted to one, and that's very common for our customers. And you can actually preview the data as well. So if you ever want to reference the data, it's available as well. So, and it's quite easy. I'll just do a filter really quick off random filter with random values. And what you can see here is you'll see the number update. So in this case, now we're writing about 208 subjects because of this new filter I added. And then I can just delete it, and it should update to back to 233. So once we have our subject list about who we want to write about from the study, we'll go in and create a template. So let me go ahead and create a template from scratch. We're ready to write. I'm not going to go ahead and save this. And so when you create a template, you can either select from a blank template or an existing one. And so because let's just pretend this is our first time in here, let's go ahead and select the blank template. And when we come in, we're essentially going to have a scratch space to begin our authoring. So let me orient you to kind of what's going on here on the screen, and then we can kind of do some authoring ourselves. So the first thing you have is at the top, you have a ribbon of all the different types of tools that you would need in terms of fonts and styling. You can insert tables and change page layout. So the typical editing and styling that you would expect. We're doing this webinar today off my laptop, so I'm going to make this into one-line mode so I have a little more space. But then the other thing is you have this is effectively like a navigation. So each of the sections of the document that you create, in this case, since it's a new template, we don't have any. We just have this default header footer, but we can add some. And then off to the right-hand side, I can collapse that. We have all the various data domains that we might utilize in our authoring. And again, you uploaded these or we would upload them like I showed you on the previous screen, so they're available for us to use. And then of course down here we have the subject lists, which we worked on before. And we can see the various subjects and subject IDs associated with that. So for the first time, if this is your first study and you were writing for the first time, you wouldn't have any existing templates, right? So you'd have to go ahead and maybe you want to create a new section, and I'll just go ahead and hit next. You would name it our new section. You can select a category, let's just say demographics, and any kind of data that you would need, you can go ahead and add it. And so it's gonna, in this case, I'm just gonna say I just need one data table and I don't need to add any filters or anything, but go ahead and save and then that's done. And so we just created a new section. I can click on it, and effectively this is our space, we can begin writing. So that's one way to do it. The other way is to also look at existing. So if, let's say we had worked on a previous study before, I'm gonna go ahead and select from an existing. We can look at any of the studies that we had, any of the templates, and we can actually pull up previous sections. So what's nice about Writer is that anything you utilize, you're actually creating your own proprietary library of text, templates and sections. So you can reutilize whole templates or down to the section level. So I'll just go ahead and hit next. It's going to load up all of our settings. So any naming we did, any data, any formatting, any styling we did. And then as you see here, this popped up available for us to see. So if I click on this here, let's go ahead and save that. It's gonna now show us what this looks like. And we can start building up our template either with blank or existing. And we can see the various text. We can see our data if we need to. We have aliases, so we can show you what each of the variables mean if that's helpful, which we do find our writers enjoy. And then more importantly, you can actually preview this. So this is what the presentation looks like. However, what would be generated from the system is we have this preview button and it shows down here. And what's nice is you can click through and you can say, well, what does it look like for each of the patients? So very quickly, you can get a sense for, here's what this presentation would look like. And then you would continue building out your template. But once you're done, you can actually generate the templates and then export them and basically be done writing. And what's nice is that as you're creating your template or as you're creating your text or pulling in fields, you're doing so for all the patients you want to write about simultaneously. So it's essentially, it says in our case, one writer, in today's example, myself, writing those 233 narratives simultaneously is what's happening. So let's go ahead and actually look at another template. So that would be as if you were coming in for the first time. Let's look at if you had an existing template. And I think that's what we see among our users is that, your first study you do, you are building that template, but each study, subsequent study afterwards, you're more or less just reloading that template you want, or maybe loading parts of a template and just loading sections that are more desirable that you'd use and you like the presentation more. It's kind of like Lego, so you can really pick and choose what's best in that use case depending on the study. So you can see this one's a little bit more robust in terms of having more sections, having more information in here. We have a header up here. There's a few other options, and maybe I'll put on a live preview so you can see what this would look like from the document. The other thing is you also have tables. So, we see a lot of users put tables in, of course, like in text tables. And so you can see, okay, this is what a writer would create. And then in terms of what's output, it'd be something of this nature. One thing I'll point out, because it just popped up on our screen, is that in this case, the text is green. Or two things I'll point out. The text is green, so if you remember back to those default settings, that is kind of a QC feature, a review feature that says when teams like to put a different color or different kind of notification, that what is actually coming from the data. So the green pieces are coming from the data, and that basically means that the team doesn't need to touch that. That's straight from the data set. There is no kind of what we call original authoring done on that. And then the other thing I'll point out is that, if you're looking at using the software, and you might be pre-database lock, so you're off of draft STTM data, it's very easy to see in this case, because this is demo data, it's very easy to see where certain values are missing. So that's a good best practice we've seen teams utilize this for as well, to call out certain pieces of data that are missing. So once you have all this, you would hit generate and you produce this. And just to give you a flavor of what the final would look like is I will produce, generate a preview of what the document would look like once you export it to be added into the clinical study report. And it's quite easy. Once you're done, you just go ahead and hit generate, and the system just chugs along and produces it. And so what we wanted to do, this was a very, very realistic, I think, expectation about what teams produce a lot of the time. I've made the green text so that it's very clear what's being actually pulled in from the data, as you can see quite a bit, just kind of doing a quick scroll. But the other thing is, the teams will do little notes sometimes. So if something's not available, they'll put in a little note to the review team. And there's all sorts of tips and tricks you can use. But this is essentially what one patient narrative would look like, and really the rest of those 232 remaining patient narratives would look essentially identical. So if you review 1 or 2 or 5, the subsequent ones will all look the same. So two other things. I'll actually show you real quick. We'll do a quick demonstration about how this would work, how you create these. We already looked at creating sections, but we'll talk about writing in a section. Another great feature is, and it took a little bit while for me to create this, but if you, let's say this is your second or third study you're doing, and you load in a template, we have all these automated checks against the data set. So you would load your template in the software, just like we loaded this one. You would load your new data files, and the system goes through and checks the template against the data files. And this is an example of when there's an invalid field in this template relative to what was in the data set. So what that means is that either I need to go investigate this and say, okay, is the field just not present in the data set? And in that case, I could either delete the field from the template, or I could go back to my data team and say, hey, is this correct? Did you guys send me the right, the right data, the right file? And so there's a lot of automated checks in there that you don't see in those types of use cases. But we were able to produce one for today's example. And then let's really quick look at what it would be like writing. So I'm going to put the live preview on for a moment. And this would be the same thing if you're collaborating with a colleague. This would be the same thing that they see. In this case, it doesn't show in these pop-outs, but it would say, if you and I were in here, it'd say Trevor Standish is editing, the demographic introduction. So what I'll do real quick is just show you a sense of what it looks like to produce this. And I'll keep that live preview on for a moment. I'll go through here, and it's gonna, as you see, it's updating in real time. So it's very nice to have this when you're writing, but it's also nice to when you're reviewing with the team. If somebody wants to make a change, they can make a change immediately. You can discuss it, you can review it, and then you can move on. And it's applied to, like we talked about, all the various patients that we're talking about. So you can see here, it's updating, it's refreshing as we go, and we're effectively getting very similar types of outcome as we see above. Two additional things I'll point out is that in here, in this case, this is phase 3 study, whoever wrote this, C1122 Certara. This is a great example of, instead of writing this text manually, it's actually way more efficient to just have in a study ID. And so what happens so that when I save this off as a template, the next time I load this up, it's just going to read the study ID in automatically, and I wouldn't need to type that in our next one. So that's a great way you can kind of find ways to automate further as you go. And then the other thing is, as we know from data, you have various types of formatting in the data set. So if you see this here versus how it looks in our more polished version, you have all these capabilities to actually auto format things. So I'll just give you an example here. In our field settings, set case is a very popular one. So I could add this and I could say, okay, let me make this years lowercase. And what's nice, again, is we're doing this not only for this one patient, but we're doing this for all of our patients simultaneously. So it's done. Same goes with, let's say, the F for female here. We could go in. These are very popular for if statements. So in this case, if it's F, we could have it display female. And this is really good when you have, those data variables and data fields that are all sorts of formatting. You can provide a level of consistency in the presentation of the patient narrative that just is not there. It would require people to manually do this. In this case, 233 times. It's very inefficient. And when we do that, when we made that change, as you see it's updated here, that's also saved in our library. So the next time if you were to use this demographic introduction, not only this text is saved, but the data fields for the domain are saved, and any kind of formatting you've placed on there is saved as well. So you literally are saving off to your proprietary library a true 100% automation from presentation to data to text itself. So once you're done with that, and let's say you finish, you go ahead and hit generate. It kicks off the generation, and then you download those for the subsequent study. So I'll go ahead and update this. And I'm going to jump back. And so this is really how our teams we're seeing that utilize the software, each of our customers are gaining this level of efficiency. And they're doing it, I would say each study that the teams use, they find more and more automation in the way they do it. And today we focus on talking about patient narratives. But there will be other webinars we host in the future that speak to other types of documents and automation. But that's really the demonstration today, and we'd be happy to give personal demos. Just reach out to us after the webinar, and we can coordinate that accordingly. But just be mindful of time. We have about 10 minutes left, and we do have just a couple slides we want to get to about what are other individuals and other teams doing to adopt this and scale, and then what do they think about in terms of those kind of metrics as well, and then we'll open up for questions. So the first one, and it's the most important, I think, just not only with this product in terms of Synchrogenix Writer, but any kind of product at Certara, is that making sure you have organizational alignment going into it. So do you have commitment from stakeholders? And that could be from other colleagues, it could be from other managers, directors, whatever it might be, that you're all in alignment about where you're trying to go as an organization in your automation journey. The second thing is making sure there's resources to invest. And so resources come from a number of different ways, in terms of it could be from like a financial resource. Do you have the finances to buy a license? It could come from time. So is someone's job dedicated to making this work in the organization, or are you going to be the writer, the user itself? And then the last one is about dedicated team members. I think that's a big one, to make sure that it's explicit about who's going to be adopting the technology and how they're going to adopt it. But for sure, determining if you have this alignment is definitely the number one thing for adoption and scale. The second one is about setting expectations. I think everyone gets excited about new technology, about automation, and I think we do as well here at Certara. But also set the expectations about being successful. So define what success means for you. That could mean that you apply a technology like this for 3 trials or 3 studies your year. It could be you do it for 100 studies. And so kind of setting those goals at the beginning. Planning to scale up incrementally. So just as I was talking about the number of studies, you might not want to go from 0 to 100 or have the energy for it, let's just say. So pick which studies or which therapeutic areas and how quickly you're going to scale this, and then time it out into various phases. So we've seen it where certain teams are chosen, or they have it for certain therapeutic areas or certain studies, and then they'll expand it across the organization over time as well. And then the last one I think is quite important, but sometimes it's actually overlooked, and we don't even think about it because of just the excitement of any kind of new technology and gaining that ease of use and automation, is determining how the software actually fits in your overall tech stack. So in this case, a lot of teams use Synchrogenix Writer, and they no longer need to write these patient narratives in Word, or they no longer need to, maybe they're writing it in their document management system. And so in that case, writers use to produce and write these documents, and then you can push it to a document management system, which really just becomes a static repository, storage repository at that point. I also identify data in flows. And so who's going to be providing that SDTM data? How do they communicate that, those types of elements? And then the last one is that assess, and people often forget this, when you're adding a new technology or adding a new tool, assess if existing or legacy tools are still necessary. And that's one I think that's overlooked a lot of the time, that maybe you had an in-house solution, or you're using something else to produce a narrative previously to help in that automation journey. Well, that's oftentimes a lot of overhead to maintain, maybe costs associated with that. And so doing kind of a retrospective and say, okay, do we need that tool, or do we need that any longer? And that usually associates with a lot of cost and time savings and overhead reduction. So that's one we will always advise never to kind of forget about as you look to bring on a new technology like Synchrogenix Writer. And then the last one, again, being mindful of time, is metrics to consider and track. And we could get into these in another session, but we kind of saw three main buckets that our customers talk about. So the first one is financial. So they're looking at, okay, what's the price per document? What are we kind of paying for FTE salaries, or what are we saving? And then what are the system costs? So what we just talked about a moment ago, are we retiring legacy systems or no longer licensing an alternative system? The second one, and this is probably the most popular metric talked about, or bucket of metrics, is time. So, how many days are we saving? How many hours are we saving to write? Or what is the total time? And so we're finding that teams are seeing that they're not only saving days of time, but more often than not, weeks of time, and obviously that translates to hours, just writing narratives, and it's getting to the point where the more experienced teams more or less essentially load their template that they created from the previous study, load their data, do a few checks, and then just generate the narratives. So time savings is a very large one. And then this kind of last overall bucket is this kind of catch-all. People look at how many documents can a writer feasibly write in a year. Obviously, with a product like Synchrogenix Writer, that number goes up significantly, and we see that just through uses. A very small, team can write a huge amount of documents very efficiently with high degrees of quality. Another one that I get really excited about is number of edits or number of drafts. So the number of drafts is really gone down for a lot of our customers, and the number of edits, so the QC process afterwards is very low because we're working straight from the data set. And then just overall timelines, like end days to finish all that documentation is another one. And we can, again, afterwards, if you have a follow-up, I'm available, and we could talk about how this might, what are metrics important to you, and how you might look to measure those with implementing a software like this. So just as a takeaway, and then we'll open up for questions, is that, we're finding going back to the very beginning slide about Certara's mission, we're finding that we can accelerate a lot of people's drug and vaccine development through things like automation. And so in this case, the auto generation of documents are really streamlining this process, improving quality, saving time, and amplifying traceability from data to unstructured authoring. And it's giving teams the ability now to work in parallel to their data teams, so that when the data teams are collecting data or producing STTM files, you can actually be authoring at the same time. And so as kind of a takeaway, and then again, we'll talk about some questions, is determine if you have organizational alignment, talk to your colleagues, make sure you're on the same page. Set expectations at the beginning of your journey. It is, the journey of automation is long, but it is well worth it, and everyone's jobs get a lot easier throughout it. And then the last one is, assess how it fits into your overall technology stack, and how it can augment or replace existing tools. So I want to open it up for questions, Sebastian, that we might answer in the last couple of minutes.
Sure, Trevor. Yeah, thank you so far for the input, great insights. And again, as a reminder, you can submit your questions in the chat pane here in the control panel, and we have already a couple of questions. First question, where does the data come from and under what format? Could you show the data source? And in addition to that, the attendee said that in a post-authorization reality, data may not be so complete or structured.
So let me touch on the first piece, and then maybe I'll have you ask again, Sebastian. So the data teams, and it's usually like a statistics team or maybe data management team who are producing the SDTM or Adams data sets. And so if that's an outsourced vendor like a CRO, or or if that's in-house in your organization, essentially those team members would provide that data set to you, and you can actually, or they can upload it. We have some customers who those teams just upload it straight to the software. The writer is more or less just requested. And it's the same if you've ever written a patient narrative where you've asked one of those data teams for like a table of listing about patients, which you have up on one screen, and then the other screen you start typing away. That essentially that information and those tables are coming from that data set. So they no longer those data teams really like it because they no longer need to produce things like those tables or listings of patient data. They just need to send over the data, or in this case, you could actually invite them as a collaborator to upload it itself. And then what was the other part of that question, Sebastian?
That was just an addition to the first, or to that question, that in reality, the data may not be so complete or structured.
Yeah, so what's nice about when we're talking about like STTM, it follows CDISC standards, right? So it's pretty common. Most organizations in industry use a software like our P21 Pinnacle 21 Enterprise to validate those data sets to make sure they're compliant to the CDISC standards. So because of that, when that's the same data set you're effectively loading here, and that's the same kind of format and compliance that more or less regulators are looking for. So it's pretty standard now at this point, and that gives us a huge amount of flexibility in terms of features that then our users can use to automate any kind of presentations or narratives like we looked at.
All right, thank you. I know we are way over time, but let me pick out one more question, and then maybe we close it. And feel free to contact us anytime for your specific and individual questions. But this is a great question. I would like to ask you, which came through the chat here: how do I use our existing template in the software?
Okay, existing template. So what probably the most common use case is when we saw together, and I'll try to be concise in my answer just so we get to it. When we created a template from scratch, what you would do is you would basically just add a bunch of sections very quickly and name them. You're effectively going to replicate your template. I would say you probably can do it in like 30 minutes, more or less. So you just create those sections, name them according to your template, so that with the same kind of headings and navigation, and then you can just copy in. It supports copy and paste the product, and so you can, if you have any kind of standard template text, you can use that as a starting place to just copy and paste in. But then once you do that, then you'll want to start to make it kind of like what we call these smart templates that interact with data. But that's how you would essentially make your first template from an existing one you have, like let's say in a Word. And then once you do that for the first time, like again, I said, it probably takes about 30 minutes, let's say, that is there forever stored in the software in your instance. So then you can reuse that for unlimited number of studies to the end of time, basically.
All right. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that answer. And I think we wrap it up for today. Again, we're open to your questions. If you have individual questions you want to ask Trevor or team, then please reach out. And again, as a reminder, we will send to you the recording of this webinar. Feel free to rewatch it, to share it with your colleagues, and discuss in your team. And with that, I would say, again, thank you, Trevor, for this great webinar, and thank you all for your participation. Take care.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone.
See you next time. Bye.
Bye.